I never thought volunteering at a nursing home would change my life. But then again, I never expected to meet someone like Lauren either. The winter wind cut through my wool coat as I pushed through the glass doors of Sunset Manor, my arms full of hand-knit scarves I'd spent weeks perfecting. Each one told a story through its pattern. Blues that reminded me of summer skies, greens like fresh meadow grass, purples deep as twilight. My auburn hair whipped around my face as the automatic doors struggled against the December gusts. "Claire, you're here early today?" Emma from the front desk called out. She was my gallery assistant during the week but always seemed to know my volunteer schedule better than I did. Traffic was lighter than usual. I adjusted my grip on the scarves, trying to calm my usual pre-social anxiety. Crowds still made me nervous, even after 3 months of weekly visits. That's when she walked in. Lauren moved like she was still dancing, which I later learned she actually was. She'd come straight from teaching an evening ballet class. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, not a strand out of place despite the weather. Those blue eyes swept the lobby with the kind of confidence I'd never possessed, taking in everything at once. Her ballet attire peeked out from beneath a black winter coat that probably cost more than I made in a month selling my textile pieces. We both approached the reception desk simultaneously, and I caught a whiff of her perfume, something light and expensive that made my homemade lavender sachets seem suddenly inadequate. "I'm here to see Margaret Patterson," she said to the receptionist, her voice carrying that slight breathiness that comes from physical exertion. My heart did this weird little flutter. "I'm assigned to Margaret too," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Lauren turned to look at me properly for the first time, and I swear time slowed down. Her eyes traveled from my face down to the colorful scarves in my arms, then back up with what looked like genuine interest rather than the polite dismissal I usually got from put-together women like her. "You made those?" she asked, reaching out to touch the soft wool of the top scarf. "Yeah, I'm a textile artist." The words felt awkward in my mouth the way they always did when I had to explain what I did for a living. "They're beautiful. Margaret's going to love them." The receptionist cleared her throat, obviously annoyed that we were blocking other visitors. "Room 247. Margaret specifically requested that both of you visit together today. She said she has stories to tell." We walked down the hallway in awkward silence, the only sound being Lauren's ballet flats against the linoleum, and my boots squeaking slightly with each step. I kept stealing glances at her profile, wondering what someone like her was doing visiting elderly residents. She looked like she belonged at gallery openings or fancy restaurants, not in a nursing home that smelled faintly of disinfectant and yesterday's lunch. Margaret was waiting for us in her chair by the window, her silver hair perfectly styled despite being 92 years old. Her eyes lit up when she saw us approaching together. "There are my 2 girls," she said with a smile that immediately put me at ease. "I've been so excited for you to meet each other." Lauren and I exchanged confused glances. How did Margaret know we'd never met before? "Sit down, both of you." "Claire, those scarves are even more gorgeous than usual." "Lauren, you look like you've been working hard. Your cheeks are still flushed from dancing." I settled into the chair closest to Margaret while Lauren took the one across from me, and I couldn't help but notice how gracefully she moved even while sitting down. Everything about her seemed deliberate and practiced, like she'd trained her body to never make an ungraceful movement. "Now then," Margaret said, settling back with the expression of someone who'd been planning this moment for weeks. "Let me tell you about the time I met my husband at a dance in 1952. Margaret had a way of making you feel like you belonged exactly where you were, which was something I desperately needed after years of feeling like I was always in the wrong place at the wrong time. Over the next few weeks, she insisted that Lauren and I visit together every Tuesday evening, claiming she needed an audience for her stories. 2 listeners are better than 1, Margaret would say with that knowing smile of hers. Besides, Claire needs to hear about romance, and Lauren needs to learn about patience. I wasn't sure how she'd figured us out so quickly, but Margaret had this uncanny ability to see right through people. She'd spent 92 years watching human nature, and apparently that gave her some kind of superpower when it came to reading between the lines. Lauren started arriving earlier each week, often beating me to Margaret's room despite my best efforts to get there first. I'd find them discussing everything from current events to childhood memories, Lauren's laughter filling the space in ways that made my chest feel warm and tight simultaneously. "Your textile work reminds me of my grandmother's quilts," Lauren told me one evening while I was showing Margaret a new wall hanging I'd been working on. She used to say that every stitch held a memory. That's exactly how I think about it, I said, surprised by how easily she understood something most people dismissed as just craft work. Each piece of wool carries the story of where it came from, and when you weave them together, you create something entirely new while honoring the past, Lauren finished, her blue eyes focused intently on my face. Margaret clapped her hands together. See? I told you two would understand each other. The following week, Lauren arrived carrying a small portable speaker and looked almost shy as she set it up near the window. I thought maybe you'd like to see what I do, she said to Margaret, but her eyes kept glancing at me. If that's okay with both of you. Margaret settled back in her chair with obvious delight. Oh, this is better than cable television. Lauren pressed play, and classical music filled the small room. Then she began to move, and I swear my heart forgot how to beat properly. Every movement was deliberate and fluid, like she was painting pictures in the air with her body. Her blonde hair caught the afternoon light streaming through the window, and I found myself mesmerized by the way she seemed to float across the linoleum floor that usually squeaked under everyone's feet. When she finished, Margaret applauded enthusiastically, but I just sat there staring like an idiot. That was incredible, I finally managed to say. Lauren's cheeks flushed pink. It's nothing fancy, just some basic combinations I teach my students. Nothing fancy, she says, Margaret chuckled. Child, that was poetry in motion. Later, as we walked toward the parking lot together, Lauren slowed her pace to match mine. Can I ask you something? She said, pulling her coat tighter against the February wind. Sure. Do you ever feel like you're performing your life instead of living it? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I've spent so many years trying to be perfect at everything. Perfect technique, perfect posture, perfect lesson plans for my students. But watching you with your art, you seem so genuine. Like you're not afraid to let people see the real you. I almost laughed out loud. If only she knew how terrified I was most of the time. How I practiced conversations in my head before having them. How I'd rather spend an entire weekend alone with my wool than face a room full of strangers. I'm not brave, I told her honestly. I'm actually pretty much a coward about most things. But you put your heart into everything you create. That takes courage. We'd reached her car, a sleek silver sedan that looked like it had never seen a day of bad weather. My beat-up Toyota sat 2 spaces away, covered in the kind of road salt stains that came from actually driving during winter. Claire, she said, turning to face me fully. Would you maybe want to grab coffee sometime, when we're not at the nursing home? The wind whipped my hair across my face, and for once I didn't immediately push it away. Something about the way she was looking at me made me feel like I didn't need to hide behind my usual self-consciousness. I'd like that, I said, and meant it more than I'd meant anything in a long time. Coffee turned into Lauren coming over to my studio apartment the following Saturday afternoon. I'd spent the entire morning frantically cleaning and rearranging my workspace, trying to make it look less like a tornado had hit a craft store, and more like an actual artist's sanctuary. When she knocked on my door, I almost didn't answer. My apartment was basically one large room where I lived, slept, and created, with yarn and fabric covering every available surface. Half-finished projects hung from the ceiling like colorful ghosts, and my bed was barely visible under stacks of wool samples I'd been meaning to organize for months. Wow, Lauren said when I finally let her in, and I braced myself for polite disappointment. Instead, she turned in a slow circle, taking everything in with wonder. This is incredible. It's like being inside a rainbow. She moved through my space with that same fluid grace she brought to everything, touching things gently and asking questions about techniques I'd never had anyone show genuine interest in before. Her blonde hair caught the light streaming through my north-facing windows, and I found myself explaining my color choices based on how the afternoon sun would hit different sections of wall. This pattern here, she said, pointing to a tapestry I'd been working on for 6 months, it reminds me of choreography. Like you're composing movements with thread. I never thought of it that way, but you're right. I moved closer to show her the specific weave technique, and our shoulders touched briefly. See how the tension changes here to create the curve? Like how a dancer has to shift weight to transition between positions, she murmured, her voice softer than usual. That's when I made the possibly stupid decision to suggest she show me some basic ballet positions. I'd been curious about her world the same way she seemed fascinated by mine, and my apartment had enough open floor space if we moved a few things around. You sure? I don't want to take over your space. Please. I'd love to understand what you do better. Lauren kicked off her shoes and began demonstrating first position, second position, explaining how dancers build complexity from simple foundations. I tried to follow along, immediately feeling clumsy and awkward compared to her effortless elegance. Here, let me help, she said, moving behind me to adjust my posture. Her hands settled lightly on my waist, guiding my alignment, and I swear every nerve in my body suddenly woke up. Shoulders back, chin up slightly, she instructed, her breath warm against my ear. Feel how your spine wants to lengthen? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Her hands moved to my arms, positioning them in the graceful curve of first position, and I caught her scent again, that light perfume mixed with something uniquely her. Better, she said, but she didn't step away. Instead, her hands remained on my arms, and when I turned my head slightly, her face was closer than I'd expected. Claire, she said quietly, and there was something in her voice I'd never heard before. Yeah? I should probably mention that I've never felt this way about a woman before. My heart started doing that fluttery thing again. What way? Like I want to know everything about you. Like your laugh is my new favorite sound. Like I think about you between Tuesday visits and wonder what you're creating. I turned fully to face her, and we were standing impossibly close in the middle of my chaotic, beautiful apartment, with afternoon sunlight streaming through windows and casting everything in gold. Lauren, I should tell you something too. What? I've been attracted to women my whole life, but I've never had the courage to do anything about it. She smiled, and it transformed her entire face from carefully composed to absolutely radiant. So, we're both figuring this out? Yeah, I guess we are. That's when she kissed me, soft and tentative at first, then with growing confidence as I kissed her back. Her lips tasted like the vanilla chai tea she'd been drinking, and her hair smelled like the expensive shampoo I'd been too intimidated to try. Everything about the moment felt both completely natural and utterly surreal. When we finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine. This is probably going to sound crazy, she said, but I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to meet you. It doesn't sound crazy at all, I whispered back, meaning every word. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking and kissing in equal measure, her curled up on my couch while I worked on a new piece, both of us marveling at how easy it felt to exist in the same space together. The winter storm hit Richmond harder than anyone expected, dumping nearly 2 feet of snow overnight and shutting down most of the city. I woke up Friday morning to my phone buzzing with a text from Lauren. My heat went out and I can't get a repair guy until Monday. Mind if I camp out at your place for the weekend? Mind? I practically bounced out of bed. She arrived an hour later carrying an overnight bag and looking adorably flustered. Her perfect blonde hair actually messed up by the wind for once. I'd never seen her anything less than completely put together, and somehow the sight of her slightly disheveled made my heart do that fluttery thing even more intensely. Thank you for this, she said, stomping snow off her boots in my tiny entryway. I know we haven't been, whatever we are, for very long. We're figuring it out, I reminded her, taking her coat. And you're always welcome here. The forced proximity of being snowed in together revealed things about both of us that regular dating probably would have taken months to uncover. Lauren turned out to be surprisingly messy when relaxed, leaving coffee cups on random surfaces and curling up on my couch with her legs tucked under her like a cat. I discovered that she hummed unconsciously when she was content, usually classical pieces I didn't recognize but found oddly soothing. Saturday afternoon, while the snow continued falling outside, I taught her to use my small hand loom. She sat cross-legged on the floor beside me, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration as she tried to maintain even tension on the wool threads. This is harder than it looks, she muttered, accidentally pulling too tight and bunching the weave. Everything worth doing is, I said, covering her hands with mine to guide the motion. Feel the rhythm? It's like music but with fiber. She looked up at me, and something shifted in the air between us. We'd been dancing around this deeper attraction for weeks, stealing kisses and holding hands, but always with the safety net of knowing one of us would eventually go home. Claire, she said quietly, what are we doing here? Right now? Making a complete mess of this weaving project. She laughed, but her eyes stayed serious. You know what I mean. I did know. We were two women who'd found something unexpected in each other, something that felt too important to treat casually but too new to define clearly. I don't have all the answers, I admitted, but I know I've never felt this comfortable with another person. I know I look forward to seeing you more than anything else in my week, and I know that when you smile at me, everything else just stops mattering. She leaned closer, close enough that I could see the tiny flecks of darker blue in her eyes. I've spent my entire adult life trying to control every variable, plan every outcome, but with you, I don't want to plan in anything. I just want to see what happens. So let's see what happens. This time when we kissed, it felt different. Less tentative, more intentional. Her hands found their way into my hair, and mine settled at her waist, pulling her closer. The unfinished weaving project fell forgotten beside us, as we explored this new territory together. Later, much later, we lay tangled together in my bed, her head on my chest while snow continued falling outside my windows. The room was dim except for the soft glow from my bedside lamp, and everything felt hushed and sacred. I need to tell you something, Lauren said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. What? I was engaged once, to a man named David. Everyone said we were perfect together. Both dancers, both ambitious, both from the right kind of families. I stroked her hair, waiting. But I never felt with him what I feel with you, not even close. I thought maybe that meant I was broken somehow, that I wasn't capable of the kind of love other people talked about. And now? Now I think I was just loving the wrong people. I pressed a kiss to the top of her head. For what it's worth, I think David's loss was definitely my gain. She laughed, the sound vibrating against my skin. I love how you make everything seem simple. Maybe some things are supposed to be simple. We spent Sunday morning in bed, talking about everything and nothing, sharing stories we'd never told anyone else. Lauren told me about the pressure she'd felt her entire life to be perfect, how ballet had started as joy but become a prison of expectations. I told her about the loneliness of being an artist, how most people saw my work as just a hobby rather than a profession. I have a confession, she said, tracing patterns on my arm. I've been driving past your building sometimes, just hoping I might catch a glimpse of you in the window. That's not creepy at all, I teased. Says the woman who asked the nursing home receptionist what days I usually visit. We were both quiet for a moment, marveling at how quickly we'd become important to each other. Claire, Lauren said eventually, I don't want this weekend to end. It doesn't have to, I said, meaning it completely. The storm might be over, but this doesn't have to be. Things had been perfect between Lauren and me for 3 weeks when everything suddenly got weird at Sunset Manor. We'd fallen into this comfortable rhythm of spending Tuesday evenings with Margaret, then going back to my place or occasionally to Lauren's pristine apartment downtown. But that Tuesday, something was different. Margaret seemed unusually agitated when we arrived, her normally styled silver hair slightly mussed and her hands fidgeting with the edge of her blanket. Girls, sit down, she said, before we'd even properly greeted her. I need to ask you something, Lauren. Lauren settled into her usual chair, but I could see tension creeping into her shoulders. What is it, Margaret? Tell me about Sophia. The color drained from Lauren's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair, and she went completely still in that way dancers do when they're trying to control their breathing. I don't know what you mean, Lauren said, but her voice came out strained and higher than usual. Your imaginary friend from when you were little, the one you used to talk about when your grandmother brought you here to visit. You remember? You were maybe 7 or 8 years old? I looked between them, completely lost. Lauren had never mentioned visiting Sunset Manor as a child, and she definitely never said anything about an imaginary friend named Sophia. Margaret, I think you might be confusing me with someone else, Lauren said, but she was already standing up, reaching for her purse. No confusion here, dear. You had the most vivid stories about this girl Sophia. Said she had red hair and green eyes, and that she understood you better than anyone else in the world. My blood went cold. Red hair and green eyes, like me. Lauren was backing toward the door now, her face pale and her breathing shallow. I have to go. I'm sorry, I just remembered I have something I need to do. She practically ran out of the room, leaving me sitting there staring at Margaret in complete bewilderment. What just happened? I asked. Margaret sighed deeply, suddenly looking every one of her 92 years. I probably shouldn't have brought it up so directly. But Claire dear, there's something you need to know about yourself. She reached into her bedside drawer and pulled out an old photograph, the edges yellowed and slightly cracked. When she handed it to me, I nearly dropped it. The woman in the photo looked exactly like me. Same auburn hair, same green eyes, same face shape. She was standing in front of what looked like the main entrance to Sunset Manor, wearing a 1982nd style dress and smiling at the camera. "Who is this?" I whispered. "My daughter, Sophia. She died when she was 28, about 30 years ago now. Car accident on a rainy night." I stared at the photograph, my hands shaking slightly. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. We could have been twins separated by decades. "She used to work here part-time while she was in college," Margaret continued. "Art therapy for some of the residents. She was so talented with her hands, always creating beautiful things. Reminded me a lot of you, actually." "But why did Lauren run off like that?" Margaret's expression grew sad. "Because little Lauren used to spend hours talking to my Sophia when her grandmother was here for treatments. They became quite close, those two. And when Sophia died, Lauren was heartbroken. She kept talking about her friend Sophia for months afterward, until the adults convinced her it had all been her imagination." My head was spinning. "So Lauren knew your daughter?" "Knew her and adored her. And now here you are, 30 years later, looking exactly like my Sophia and falling in love with the same little girl who mourned her passing." I sat there for a long time, staring at the photograph and trying to process what this meant. No wonder Lauren had seemed so comfortable with me from the beginning, so immediately drawn to my work and my appearance. No wonder she'd said it felt like she'd been waiting her whole life to meet me. But did that mean her feelings were real? Or was she unconsciously trying to replace someone from her childhood? When I finally left Margaret's room, I found Lauren sitting in her car in the parking lot, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. I knocked on her passenger side window, and she looked up with tears streaming down her face. "Get in," she said, unlocking the door. "Lauren, what's going on?" Margaret showed me a picture of her daughter, and she looked exactly like me. "She said you knew her when you were little." "I know how this must sound," Lauren said, her voice thick with tears. "I know you must think I'm some kind of crazy person who's been projecting childhood memories onto you. Is that what you've been doing?" She turned to look at me fully, and I could see the genuine anguish in her blue eyes. "I don't know, Claire. I honestly don't know anymore. When I first saw you, it felt like recognition, like coming home. But now, I'm wondering if that's because you remind me of someone I lost when I was 8 years old. So what does that mean for us?" "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know if what I feel for you is real, or if I've been chasing a ghost this whole time." The weeks following Margaret's revelation were torture. Lauren started canceling our Tuesday nursing home visits, claiming she had scheduling conflicts with her ballet classes. She stopped returning my texts right away, and when she did respond, her messages were brief and distant. I threw myself into my textile work with manic intensity, creating piece after piece that reflected my confusion and heartbreak. Dark blues woven with silver threads that looked like tears, angry reds twisted with black wool that felt like my current emotional state. My apartment filled with the evidence of my pain, half-finished projects hanging everywhere like colorful accusations. The worst part was not knowing if Lauren's feelings had ever been real. Every kiss we'd shared, every moment of intimacy, every whispered confession. Had it all been her unconscious attempt to reconnect with a dead woman from her childhood? 3 weeks after the Margaret incident, I was working late on a particularly complex weaving pattern when someone knocked on my door. My heart jumped, hoping it might be Lauren finally ready to talk. Instead, I found Margaret standing in my hallway, looking frail but determined. "Margaret, how did you get here? Should you even be out of the facility?" "I signed myself out for the evening," she said with a mischievous smile. "Told them I was visiting my granddaughter. Technically not a lie, since I've started thinking of you that way." I helped her inside, settling her on my couch with a cup of tea. She looked around at all my recent work with knowing eyes. "Lot of pain in these pieces," she observed. "It's been a rough few weeks. Because of what I told you about Sophia." I nodded, focusing on my tea rather than meeting her gaze. "I don't know if Lauren's feelings for me are genuine, or if she's been seeing your daughter when she looks at me." Margaret sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Can I tell you something about my Sophia that I didn't mention before?" I looked up. She was gay, Claire. Never said it outright, mind you. This was the 1980s, and even I wasn't as accepting as I should have been. But I knew. A mother knows these things. My chest tightened. What does that have to do with Lauren and me? When little Lauren used to visit with her grandmother, she and Sophia would spend hours together. Not playing typical games. They'd make up elaborate stories, create imaginary worlds where anything was possible. Lauren was drawn to Sophia not just as a friend, but as someone who understood something about her that she couldn't even name yet. So you think Lauren's attraction to women comes from knowing your daughter? Lord, no. I think Sophia recognized something in that little girl that takes most people years to figure out about themselves. She was nurturing Lauren's true nature, even at 8 years old. Margaret reached over and took my hand with her papery fingers. What I'm saying is, your resemblance to Sophia might have caught Lauren's attention initially, but what kept her interested was you, the real you. How can you be sure? Because I watched Lauren with my daughter 30 years ago, and I've watched Lauren with you. With Sophia, she was a child seeking guidance from someone she admired. With you, she's a woman falling in love. Before I could respond, there was another knock at my door. This time, it really was Lauren, standing in my hallway looking exhausted and holding a bouquet of flowers that matched the colors in one of my textile pieces. Margaret, Lauren said, seeing the elderly woman on my couch. What are you doing here? Cleaning up my own mess, Margaret replied. I should have handled things differently at the nursing home. Should have talked to each of you separately instead of ambushing you both. Lauren stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes that suggested she'd been crying recently. Claire, I've been doing a lot of thinking, she said. About Sophia, about you, about what I feel. And? I went back to the nursing home yesterday and talked to Margaret for a long time. She helped me understand the difference between childhood attachment and adult love. Margaret stood up slowly. I think this is my cue to leave you two alone. Claire, dear, call me a taxi, would you? After Margaret left, Lauren and I stood facing each other in my apartment filled with tortured artwork, both of us afraid to make the first move. I need you to know, Lauren said finally, that what I feel for you isn't about Sophia. Yes, maybe seeing you triggered some buried memories, but Claire, I fell in love with your laugh, with the way you get completely absorbed in your work, with how gentle you are with the nursing home residents, with your terrible taste in movies, and your habit of leaving coffee cups everywhere. Those are all very unromantic reasons to love someone, I said, trying to lighten the mood. They're exactly the right reasons, she replied seriously, because they're about who you are, not who you remind me of. She moved closer, setting the flowers on my work table. I'm sorry I ran away. I'm sorry I made you doubt what we have. I was scared that my feelings weren't real, but spending these weeks apart proved they absolutely are. How can you be sure? Because missing you felt like missing a part of myself. Because when I imagined never seeing you again, it physically hurt. Because I don't want to figure out this life thing without you. I studied her face, looking for any sign of uncertainty or confusion. All I saw was Lauren. Not the perfect ballet instructor, not the composed woman I'd first met, but the real person underneath all that careful control. I missed you too, I admitted. So much that I've been weaving my heartbreak into everything I've created. Can I kiss you? She asked quietly. Please. When our lips met, it felt like coming home and starting an adventure all at once. Nothing about the kiss reminded me of ghosts or childhood memories or complicated family histories. It just felt like Lauren and me, finally finding our way back to each other. Things were finally back on track between Lauren and me. We'd resumed our Tuesday visits to Margaret, spent most weekends together, and I'd even started keeping some of my art supplies at her downtown apartment. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I belonged somewhere, or rather, with someone. That all changed on a Thursday morning in April when Lauren called me, sounding completely shaken. Claire, you're not going to believe this. David showed up at my studio this morning. David. Her ex-fiancé. The one she'd broken things off with 2 years ago to focus on her career. The one who represented everything about her old life that she'd been trying to move away from. What did he want? I asked, though part of me already suspected. To win me back. Apparently he's been thinking about our relationship, decided he made mistakes, wants another chance. He brought flowers and this whole speech about how we belong together. My stomach dropped. What did you tell him? That I'm seeing someone else now, but he didn't seem to think that was important. He asked if it was serious, and when I said yes, he assumed it was another man. I didn't correct him. Why not? There was a long pause. Because I wasn't sure how he'd react. And honestly, Claire, I'm not sure I'm ready for everyone to know about us yet. That stung more than I wanted to admit. We'd been together for months now, but Lauren still hadn't told her family or most of her friends about me. I'd understood her need for privacy initially, but I was starting to feel like a secret she was keeping rather than a girlfriend she was proud of. So what happens now? I asked. He wants to take me to dinner tomorrow night. To talk. Are you going? Another pause. I think I have to. If only to make it clear that we're over and he needs to move on. I wanted to object, wanted to tell her it was a terrible idea, but something in her voice made me hold back. Lauren was already dealing with enough pressure about our relationship. I didn't want to add to it. Okay, I said instead. Just be careful. Friday night was torture. I tried working on a new piece, tried watching Netflix, tried everything I could think of to distract myself from imagining Lauren at some romantic restaurant with her ex-fiancé. The man who'd once been important enough to her that she'd agreed to marry him. By the time Saturday morning rolled around without any word from her, I was convinced I'd lost her. Maybe David had reminded her how much easier her life would be with a man. Maybe she'd realized that being with me meant constantly explaining herself to the world in ways that being with him never would. That afternoon, I drove past her apartment building 3 times before finally getting the courage to go inside. I found her door slightly open and heard voices from within, Lauren's and a deep male voice I didn't recognize. Come on, Lauren, the man was saying. You can't tell me you don't remember how good we were together. We had plans, a future all mapped out. Those were your plans, David, not mine, Lauren replied, but her voice sounded tired rather than firm. You're just scared. This thing with whoever you're seeing now, it's just you acting out because you feel like you missed opportunities. But I'm offering you everything we talked about. Marriage, stability, the dance studio we plan to open together. I should have knocked, should have announced myself, but instead I stood frozen in the hallway, listening to him systematically dismantle every reason Lauren might have for choosing me over him. I know you, Lauren. You're not the type to throw away your whole life for some experimental phase. It's not a phase, she said, but there was uncertainty in her voice that made my heart sink. Then prove it. If this person is so important to you, why haven't you introduced them to your family? Why are you keeping them separate from the rest of your life? I'd heard enough. I turned and walked away before either of them could discover me eavesdropping, but the damage was already done. David had articulated every insecurity I'd been trying to ignore about our relationship. Back at my apartment, I stared at the textile piece I'd been working on, a complex pattern that incorporated threads in, both Lauren's favorite blue and my preferred green, woven together in intricate designs that represented how our lives had become intertwined. Suddenly it looked naive and ridiculous, like the fantasy of someone who'd convinced herself that love could overcome practical concerns. My phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. Dinner was awful. David wouldn't listen to anything I said. Can I come over? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I think we need some space to figure out what we really want. What do you mean? Claire, what's wrong? Instead of answering, I turned off my phone. The next few days passed in a blur of obsessive work and deliberate isolation. I ignored Lauren's calls and texts, threw myself into creating a series of wall hangings that were all sharp angles and clashing colors, the visual representation of heartbreak and confusion. On Tuesday, I went to Sunset Manor alone for the first time in months. Where's Lauren? Margaret asked immediately. She's dealing with some complications from her past, I said, settling into my usual chair. Margaret studied my face with those sharp 92-year-old eyes. And you're running away instead of fighting for her. I'm not running away. I'm being realistic. Bullshit, Margaret said, and the profanity sounded shocking coming from her usually refined mouth. You're scared that loving her means you might get hurt, so you're hurting yourself first to maintain control. Margaret, you don't understand the situation. I understand that Lauren spent 30 years unconsciously looking for something she lost as a child, and when she finally found it in you, you're too afraid to believe it's real. We sat in silence while Margaret's words sank in. Finally, she reached over and patted my hand. Claire, dear, some things are worth fighting for, even when you're scared. especially when you're scared. Margaret's words haunted me for the rest of the week. By Friday, I'd created enough angry textile art to fill a small gallery, but none of it made me feel any better about pushing Lauren away. I was sitting in my apartment, staring at a half-finished weaving that looked like a storm at sea, when someone knocked on my door with unusual urgency. I expected to find Lauren, finally fed up with my silence and ready to demand answers. Instead, Margaret stood in my hallway again, this time looking genuinely frail and leaning heavily on a walker. "Margaret, what are you doing out of Sunset Manor, again?" "I need to tell you the whole truth about Sophia," she said, breathing heavily. "May I come in?" Once she was settled on my couch with tea, Margaret pulled out a small wooden box I'd never seen before. "These are letters Sophia wrote but never sent," she said, opening the lid to reveal dozens of folded papers. "I found them after she died, hidden in her bedroom. They were all addressed to the same person." She handed me one of the letters, yellowed with age but still legible. The handwriting was delicate and feminine, and as I read, my hands started shaking. "Dear Lauren," the letter began, "I know you're only 8 years old and probably won't understand this for many years, but I need to write it down. You have something special inside you, something that makes you different from other people. Don't let anyone convince you to hide that part of yourself. The world needs people like us. People who love differently, who see beauty in unexpected places, who create art from the depths of their hearts." I looked up at Margaret, stunned. Sophia knew Lauren was gay when she was 8 years old? Sophia had what you might call intuition about these things. She recognized herself in that little girl. The longing, the feeling of not quite fitting in, the way Lauren's eyes lit up when she talked about the older girls in her dance classes. Margaret handed me another letter, this one longer and more detailed. "I dream sometimes about what you'll be like when you grow up," I read aloud. "I imagine you'll be beautiful and talented and kind. I imagine you'll find someone who sees all the wonderful things about you that you can't yet see about yourself. I wish I could be there to meet the woman you choose to love, to tell her how lucky she is to have found you." Tears were streaming down my face now. "Why are you showing me these?" "Because Lauren came to see me yesterday after you ignored her calls all week. She told me about David, about your fight, about how you think she's not sure about choosing you over him." Margaret pulled out one final letter, this one shorter than the others. "This was the last thing Sophia wrote before she died," she said gently. With trembling hands I unfolded the paper and read, "Lauren, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, but you've grown up to be everything I hoped you'd become. You've found love, real love, with someone who understands your heart. Don't let fear or other people's expectations keep you from that love. Fight for it, choose it. Over and over again, choose love." I was sobbing now, clutching the letter to my chest. "Margaret, I've been such an idiot." "Yes, you have, but it's not too late to fix it. What if she's already chosen David? What if I've pushed her away for good?" Margaret smiled. "Child, that girl has been sitting in the Sunset Manor parking lot every day this week, hoping you'd show up for our Tuesday visits and talk to her. She's not choosing anyone else." After Margaret left, I sat in my apartment for a long time, reading and rereading Sophia's letters. Here was proof that Lauren's path to loving women had nothing to do with unconscious childhood memories, and everything to do with who she truly was. Here was validation from beyond the grave that what Lauren and I had was real and worth fighting for. I looked around at all the dark, angry artwork I'd created over the past week, visual representations of my own fear and insecurity. Then I looked at the piece I'd been working on before David's arrival, the one that wove Lauren's blue and my green together in harmonious patterns. That's the piece that represented the truth of what we had together. I grabbed my keys and drove to Lauren's apartment, my heart pounding the entire way. Her car was in its usual spot, which meant she was home, which meant I hadn't completely ruined everything yet. She answered the door on the first knock, like she'd been waiting by it. Her blonde hair was messier than usual, and her eyes were red from crying, but she was still the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. "Claire?" she said, and my name sounded like relief in her voice. "I'm sorry," I said immediately. "I'm sorry I ran away instead of talking to you. I'm sorry I made you doubt how I feel about you. I'm sorry I let my own fears nearly destroy the best thing that's ever happened to me. Claire, let me explain about David." "You don't need to explain anything." Margaret showed me Sophia's letters. "I understand now that you've always been exactly who you are, Lauren. Your feelings for me aren't complicated by the past. They're just real. She stepped closer, close enough that I could see the hope working its way back into her blue eyes. I told David that I'm in love with a woman named Claire Anderson, and that I'd rather spend my life creating something beautiful with her than settling for the safe choice with him, she said. I told him that you make me braver and happier and more myself than I've ever been. And what did he say? That I was making a mistake I'd regret. Then he left for Boston this morning. I reached for her hands, interlacing our fingers. Are you making a mistake? The only mistake I made was not fighting harder for us when you tried to pull away, she said. Claire, I love you. Not because you remind me of someone else, not because you're safe or convenient, but because you're you, because you see the world in colors I never noticed before, because you make me want to be brave enough to love completely. I love you too, I whispered. So much that it terrifies me. Good, she said, pulling me closer. Love should be a little terrifying. Otherwise, how do you know it matters? When we kissed, it tasted like forgiveness and new beginnings, and the promise of everything we could build together if we were brave enough to try. 6 months later, I was standing in what used to be my cramped studio apartment, now transformed into something that looked like a dream of creative collaboration. Lauren had moved in 3 weeks after we'd reconciled, and somehow her ballet bears and mirrors had merged seamlessly with my looms and yarn storage to create a space that felt like both of us. The morning sunlight streamed through windows that now showcased both of our worlds, my textile pieces hanging alongside photographs of Lauren's dance performances, her trophies sharing shelf space with my weaving tools. We'd knocked down the wall between my apartment and the vacant unit next door, creating a live workspace that was pure magic. Are you ready? Lauren asked, adjusting the collar of her cream-colored dress. We'd both dressed carefully for today's visit to Sunset Manor, knowing it would be special. I think so, I said, smoothing the blue silk scarf I'd woven specifically for this occasion. But I'm nervous about showing Margaret the piece. She's going to love it. How could she not? The piece was our latest collaboration, a large textile installation that combined my weaving techniques with Lauren's choreographed movements. We'd spent months developing it, with Lauren dancing specific patterns while I wove corresponding designs, creating a visual representation of movement and emotion that neither of us could have achieved alone. At Sunset Manor, we found Margaret waiting in the common room instead of her usual bedroom, surrounded by at least a dozen other residents who'd apparently heard about our special presentation. There are my girls, Margaret said, her face lighting up in a way that made her look 20 years younger. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Claire and Lauren, the two I've been telling you about. We set up our portable display, and I felt that familiar flutter of nerves that came with showing my work to an audience. But Lauren squeezed my hand, and suddenly I remembered that we were doing this together. This piece is called Threads of Grace, I began, unveiling the textile work. And it represents the idea that love creates patterns we never could have imagined on our own. The weaving itself was stunning, blues and greens and silvers that seemed to dance even when perfectly still, but the real magic happened when Lauren began to move, her body tracing the same patterns I'd captured in wool and silk, bringing the static art to life. The residents watched in fascination as Lauren's movements told the story of how we'd met, how we'd struggled with the complications of the past, and how we'd found our way to each other. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. That was absolutely beautiful, Margaret said, tears streaming down her cheeks. Sophia would have loved this. We hope so, Lauren said, settling into the chair beside her. Because there's something else we wanted to share with you. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small velvet box, my hands trembling slightly. Margaret, I said, you've been like family to both of us. You helped us understand our past and believe in our future. So we wanted you to be the first to know. I opened the box to reveal 2 simple silver bands, each one engraved with a pattern that matched the textile piece we'd just displayed. We're getting married, Lauren announced, and the room erupted in cheers and congratulations. Margaret clapped her hands together with pure joy. Oh girls, this is wonderful. When? Next month, I said. Nothing fancy, just a small ceremony in the garden behind my studio. We'd be honored if you could be there. I wouldn't miss it for the world, Margaret said, and I know Sophia would be so proud of both of you. Later that evening, back in our combined apartment, Lauren and I sat on the floor surrounded by wedding planning materials and remnants of our latest collaborative projects. Are you sure about this? Lauren asked, holding up one of the rings. I mean, it's only been 8 months since we met. Are you having second thoughts? No, just the opposite. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for something to go wrong. This all feels too perfect. I looked around our space, our easel holding Lauren's schedule next to my color charts, her ballet shoes mixed in with my yarn baskets, evidence of our separate lives becoming beautifully intertwined. Maybe perfect isn't the right word, I said. Maybe it's just right, like we're exactly where we're supposed to be. Lauren smiled, slipping the ring onto her finger. I love how you make everything sound like poetry. I love how you make everything feel like dancing. We kissed, soft and sweet, surrounded by the literal fabric of our shared life. Outside, Richmond continued its busy evening rhythm, but in here, everything was exactly as it should be. Claire, Lauren said, pulling back to look at me seriously, I need you to know something. What? I'm not marrying you because you remind me of someone else, or because you're safe, or because you fit into some plan I had for my life. Why are you marrying me? Because you're the first person who's ever made me feel like I don't have to choose between the different parts of myself. Because you see my ambition and my vulnerability as equally beautiful. Because when I imagine my future, every single version of it includes you. I kissed her again, tasting the promise of everything we were building together. Tomorrow we'd continue planning our wedding, continue creating art that celebrated our love, continue building a life that honored both who we'd been and who we were becoming. But tonight, in our perfect imperfect space, surrounded by the evidence of our collaboration and commitment, we were already home.